You've seen the paintings. A woolly mammoth standing on a frozen plain, massive tusks curving toward the sky, surrounded by tiny figures holding spears. It looks almost peaceful, almost manageable, like a hunting trip that just happened to involve a very large animal. That image is wrong in almost every way. A bull mammoth stood 13 feet tall at the shoulder. That's taller than most ceilings in your house stacked twice. It weighed up to 12 tons. For comparison, a modern African elephant, the largest land animal alive today, weighs around 6. A mammoth wasn't just big, it was a different category of big. The kind of big that doesn't fit inside any reference point your brain already has. And your ancestors had to kill it with sharpened, not rifles, not crossbows, not anything with a trigger or a mechanism or a safe distance built in. They had sometimes a throwing stick called an atlatl that added extra force. That's it. That was the full arsenal of the most dangerous hunt a human being could attempt for most of our species' existence on this planet. Here's what the paintings always leave out: the smell. A living mammoth produced a smell so powerful it could be detected from hundreds of yards away. A mixture of musk, dung, and the lanolin-soaked fur that kept it warm in temperatures that would kill an unprotected human in hours. The hunters knew that smell before they ever saw the animal. It told them everything. How close, which direction, whether it was calm or already agitated. And here's the part that stops most people cold when they actually think about it. These hunters were not large men by modern standards. Average height around 5'5". Average weight maybe 140. Lean, experienced, and deeply aware of exactly how badly this could go. They had seen people die on hunts. They had watched tribe mates get crushed, gored, or trampled into the frozen ground. Every single person in that hunting party understood that today might be the last day they were alive. They went anyway. Not because they were reckless, not because they didn't understand. They went because a single mammoth meant the difference between a tribe that survived the winter and a tribe that didn't. The stakes weren't adventure. The stakes were everyone they had ever loved. That's where the hunt began. Not with the spear, with the decision to go at all. Finding a mammoth was not the hard part. The herds moved in patterns across the same river crossings, through the same valleys, along the same ridgelines they had used for generations. Your ancestors knew these routes the way you know the drive to work. They had been watching them their entire lives, and their fathers had watched them before that, and their fathers before that. The knowledge of where mammoths would be at which time of year was not written down anywhere. It lived inside people. Passed from mouth to ear around fires for thousands of years. So, the hunters knew where a mammoth's eyesight was surprisingly poor, but its hearing was exceptional, and its sense of smell was extraordinary. Researchers believe mammoths could detect odors from over a mile away, possibly further. This meant the entire approach, sometimes covering several miles on foot across open frozen terrain, had to be done in near total silence, communicating with hand signals so old and ingrained they were essentially a second language. No one coughed. No one stepped on a dry branch. No one spoke. For hours. Think about the last time you tried to stay completely silent in a group of people for more than a few minutes. Now imagine doing it for half a day in sub-zero temperatures, wearing animal hides, carrying a heavy spear, knowing that one wrong sound ended everything. The weapons themselves tell a story most people miss. Archaeologists have found spear points at kill sites embedded not in the outer hide, but deep inside the body cavity near the heart and lungs. This tells us something critical. The hunters were not throwing from a safe distance and hoping for the best. They were getting close. Dangerously, almost incomprehensibly close. Within 30 feet, sometimes less. Close enough to hear the animal breathe. The atlatl, a flat wooden board used to extend the throwing arm, could launch a spear at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour. Powerful enough to punch through hide several inches thick. But only if the angle was right, only if the shooter was calm enough to aim, only if the mammoth wasn't already turning toward them. There was another problem nobody talks about. Mammoths did not travel alone. A target animal almost always had others nearby. Mothers, juveniles, other bulls. Hit the wrong one, and the entire panicking mammoth herd in an open field was not a tactical situation. It was a natural disaster with legs. This is why the planning took longer than the hunt itself. The hunters studied the herd for days before moving. They identified the animal. They mapped the terrain. They chose the ground where they wanted the kill to happen. not where the mammoth happened to be standing. They thought through every sequence of events, including the ones where things went wrong. Because things always had a chance of going wrong. And everyone standing in that hunting party already knew it. The moment the hunt began, everything your ancestors had planned for days collapsed into seconds. A mammoth spooked fast. An animal that size, 12 tons of muscle and instinct, could accelerate to 15 miles per hour almost instantly. That's faster than most people can sprint. And when it ran, the ground shook. Not metaphorically, literally. You felt it in your feet before you heard it. A low rhythmic percussion coming up through the frozen earth, telling your body something enormous was moving and moving toward you. The preferred kill strategy wasn't a frontal charge, it was a drive. Hunters would split into two groups. One group circled wide and came around the far side of the animal, staying downwind, staying silent, closing the gap until they were close enough to show themselves. Then they made noise, shouting, banging, waving hides, enough to push the mammoth in a specific direction without sending it into a full run. The second group was already waiting at a pre-chosen spot, a ravine, a riverbank, a patch of soft ground near a bog where the footing was treacherous and a 12-ton animal would sink. They were herding it, inch by inch, noise by noise, into a place where it couldn't use its size. When the mammoth hit the soft ground, it slowed. Its legs sank. The massive body that made it nearly unstoppable on open terrain became a liability. And that's when the hunters moved in. Not one spear. Many. Thrown in sequence from multiple directions to prevent the animal from focusing on a single attacker, aimed at the flanks, behind the shoulder, angled down toward the heart and lungs. Each hunter had one throw. Maybe two if things went well. You didn't get a third. By the third throw, the mammoth had usually identified where you were standing. What happened next is the part the textbooks skip entirely. A mammoth did not die quickly. Even a perfect heart shot on an animal that size took time. Minutes. Sometimes longer. And a dying mammoth was arguably more dangerous than a healthy one. It was in pain, it was terrified, and it was still 12 tons. Researchers studying elephant behavior today document that mortally wounded elephants frequently charge the source of pain with everything they have left. Your ancestors knew this, they had watched it happen, so they did not rush in. They held the perimeter, they kept the pressure on. They waited, and while they waited, someone was almost certainly hurt. Bone records from this period tell a story that modern sports medicine recognizes immediately. Healed fractures in the arms, shoulders, and ribs of prehistoric hunters show up at rates significantly higher than in non-hunter populations of the same era. These were not accidents. They were occupational injuries. The physical signature of a life spent in close proximity to animals that could kill you. When the mammoth finally went down, the ground shook one more time, and then it was quiet. The hunters stood there for a moment, breathing hard in the cold air, watching the animal to make sure it wasn't going to rise again. Someone walked forward first, placed a hand on the hide, felt the heat still coming off the body. They had done it, against an animal 10 times their weight, an Enmiri. With wooden sticks and coordination, and a plan that held together just long enough. Now came the harder part. A single mammoth contained roughly 3 million calories. Put that number next to something real. An adult human needs about 2,000 calories a day to survive. One mammoth was 4 years of food for one person. For a tribe of 25, it was weeks of full bellies in winter. This wasn't a successful hunt. This was the difference between a group who made it to spring and those who didn't. Which is why what happened next looked nothing like butchering. It looked like an event. Everyone came. The hunters who had stayed behind with children and the elderly. The women. The old men who had made this same walk decades before. They came across the frozen ground toward the smell of blood and the sound of people who were still alive. And when they arrived, the work began immediately, because in freezing temperatures, you had a narrow window before the carcass stiffened. The fat hardened, and what should have taken hours took days. The butchering of a single mammoth required coordinated labor on a scale most people today never attempt. Archaeologists studying kill sites have found cut marks on bones that tell a precise story. Who cut what, in what order, with what tools? The hide came off first, in large sections, saved entirely. It became shelters, clothing, containers, straps, blankets. Nothing was discarded. Then the meat carved away in strips and slabs, packed into the hide for transport or buried immediately in the frozen ground nearby. Nature's own refrigeration, the organs eaten on the spot, still warm. Liver first, the most nutrient-dense tissue in the body. The fat rendered and stored. The bones cracked for marrow, the same way your ancestors had been cracking bones for 3 million years. The tusks and the skull and the largest bones were sometimes left in deliberate arrangements, not randomly abandoned, placed, abandoned. Researchers have found mammoth bone sites across Europe and Siberia, where the remains were organized in patterns that serve no practical function: circles, stacks, structures built from the bones of multiple animals accumulated over years. Nobody knows exactly what these meant, but they meant something. The people who made them were not wasting time on ritual because they had nothing else to do. They were doing it because some part of the experience demanded acknowledgement. You killed something that could have killed all of you. You fed everyone you loved. That doesn't just end with butchering and sleep. Here's what connects all of this to you directly. The physiological responses you feel during moments of high stakes. The tunnel vision, the time distortion, the strange calm that sometimes settles over people in genuine danger. Those are not bugs in your system. They are the exact hardware that kept a 140-pound human being functional and accurate while standing 30 feet from a 12-ton animal with a wooden spear. That hardware is still in you, completely intact, untouched by the 10,000 years of civilization sitting on top of it. Your ancestors did this for hundreds of thousands of years, not occasionally, routinely. Generation after generation, the same calculation, the same cold ground, the same moment of decision before the first spear left the hand. Every time you feel that particular combination of fear and focus before something that genuinely matters, your body is not malfunctioning, it is doing exactly what it was built to do. Reaching back across 100,000 years and running the same program. That kept your bloodline alive long enough for you to exist. You are here because they didn't miss.